All right, thank you, Bridget. Aloha, hola, hello, everyone. My name is Taryn Odom. Like she said, I'm the Connections Instructor, or a Connections Instructional Leader, supporting world languages, music, and arts teachers, as well as a Spanish teacher for the North Carolina Virtual Public Schools. I've been with NCVPS for about 7 years now, and I've also served as a course development leader, helping to create 3 Spanish courses from scratch. I helped to develop some of that course content, vendor course reviewer, advisory board member, and I'm currently working on creating a professional development course on Spanish for online teachers. Been very involved with FLANC, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina, serving in various roles and presenting on a variety of topics. My undergraduate degrees are in Spanish, psychology, and education from UNC Charlotte, and my master's is in international studies from NC State. And I'm actually currently also working as a principal intern and getting my principal licensure from UNC Wilmington. So we're going to take a look now at learner-to-learner interaction in practice and some of the best practices surrounding the topic now that we understand it and have refreshed our memories about it from a theoretical perspective. And let's see if it will. Yes. And can everybody see the second slide now? I want to make sure everybody should see where it says build community. Okay, good. So we imported them a little bit differently this time. So we heard a lot about student-to-student interaction in the target language, but I want to step back and from the very initial point that a teacher gets a student, it's important to start from that moment to build community, not only with the reported student, but our focus tonight is on the student-to-student relationships. And so the students establishing relationships between and among themselves. So there are 2 possible approaches here. So building community is just as important in an online class as it is in a face-to-face class. The research has shown us the importance. So let's take a look at how it actually works inside the course. So the 2 approaches would be asynchronous and synchronous. Ideally, there would be some sort of synchronous or live element, and the teacher should always strive for this. There may be a case where that's not possible, and if that's not possible, then asynchronous, which is not instantaneous sharing of information, is possible as well. So to establish a relationship as part of the student sharing activity that you might start, whether it's informally in an asynchronous student introductions forum or if it's synchronous student introductions in a webinar or Blackboard Collaborate session like we're doing here, it's important to establish a clear understanding of the activity as you would do with any activity, as any good teacher would do, right? You should model for the students what they should do, of course, first, using yourself as an example, and then provide a guide and or prompts on what to include, but still allowing for some variation because you want to celebrate diversity and creativity here. To further foster creative and unique responses, you want to go outside of just the basic, give me your name and your school or whatever it might be. You want to go beyond just the basic information. Try at least one engaging, open-ended question. An example might be, if you could travel to any country in the world, where would you go and why? Or what is one thing that you love to do and do well? What is your best memory as a child and what made it special? Or one of my favorites, if you could eat dinner with any person in the world, alive or deceased, who would it be and why? So these are, just very broad questions that, most students are going to have some sort of opinionated answer and they're going to be able to speak well about. And you want to try to keep the focus on the students here. Keep the focus on the students, their ideas, their opinions as much as possible. So this is one time where the course content is not the main focus because you really just want to make sure that you establish the relationships and that everybody gets to know each other as best as possible in the online environment. So you want to search for and draw connections between students. As the teacher, you want them to kind of guide, but or explain, but you are there to guide them and make connections between them. So if you have 2 students who have the same or say, oh, I would like to, have dinner with Barack Obama or Gandhi or whoever it might be, making those connections, and maybe it's a difference in opinion of why they want to meet with that person, or and accentuating the similarities, but also highlighting the beauty through diversity that is shared amongst their answers. So, and that's a big part, of what we do in oral languages is the compare contrast. and doing it in a positive way, so that it's not, I'm better than you, or my answer is better than you, or my idea was better than yours, but to celebrate the uniquities that exist amongst all of our students, and encourage them to reach out to one another. So if somebody else plays football, or there's somebody else who is in the marching band, or whatever it might be, that they can start to form those connections, and then even form friendships, even though they might not even live in the same town. So we all know the value in using the target language as much as possible within the world language classroom. I would suggest, depending on the proficiency level of the students, whatever level you're teaching, to consider doing this activity in English. And this is one of the few times I would ever really push this. And this would just be to allow for open and unfiltered communication, because you don't want the students to be worried about, they're not going to give you as expansive an answer and as detailed an answer in the L2 if they are in the first level of the language. So, but now, of course, if it's a higher level and they have that capacity and that proficiency, then by all means you can do it in the target language. But you just don't want to restrict any potential communication connections for this particular element. But I am interested, and this was one of the first questions that you will see in the lesson. Is should all student-to-student interaction in an online world language class be in the target language? So that's my first question for you, and I'm going to have my questions kind of gone throughout this presentation. So I'm going to put that in the chat box, and I would love your feedback. So should all student-to-student interaction in an online world language course be in the target language? And then as a follow-up, if you say yes, or if you say no, if you have a percentage, what do you think? You can type your answers in the chat box. If you would like to speak, by all means, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, so Judy says no. Roman says depends on how difficult the language is. Russ says it depends on the task and the level, etc. Okay. I'm seeing some commonalities here. I think a lot of people say depends. Go ahead, Herman.
I'm just going to throw out 80-20 because that's the way I like my hamburgers. But I feel like directions and questions about why things are wrong and what the student, and then reinforcement and positive reinforcement of what the student is doing right. And where they need to go. I think a lot of times stuff that is inherently more complicated and cognitive than where are you from and how old are you, stuff like that in the language learning classroom I feel should be in the target language. And then other things that I'm going to kind of talk about in my talk next week is that the communities and cultures and comparing and contrasting and some of the things that we do in a foreign language classroom that builds tolerance and understanding of other cultures and peoples, and discussions in different ways of life, history, foods, things like that. I think that that's so much better done and deeper and more meaningful for the students to process that in their native language than the second language. So, I guess those are my thoughts on, how much should be in target language versus native language.
Great, thank you for sharing. And it seems like there's consensus among everybody in the chat that it depends on the level of the class, how everything's set up, the student's proficiency. As a follow-up question, Stephen says no matter what the rule is, it pays off a lot more to motivate L2 interaction than it does to penalize L1 interaction. And I think, that's a very important concept. A lot of what I consider old school teachers, anytime you speak in English or write a word in English, it's points taken off or this, that, and the other, very harsh when it comes to that. And so I think that's a great comment because the input that they're able to provide with a little help, in their L1, is going to be potentially much greater than if you won't allow them that ability at all. And Ashley says there's a lot of apprehension for students to speak out loud. In your opinion, do you think that the amount of target language interaction, this is with students, should be or is any different in the online environment versus the face-to-face environment? Or should it be the same, or is it the same, or is it different? Bridget?
Yeah, I find that when I teach face-to-face, I use a lot more target language than, oops, sorry, my microphone is up. I find that I use a lot more target language when I teach face-to-face rather than online because of the just because of the written portion of the language. Like, my students can't read Japanese if I type it because they haven't learned all of those characters yet. So I find that, if I type in Japanese, they aren't reading those things and paying attention to them, unless it's in a live session, of course, rather than, unless it's in Romanized script. So I'm going to say, yeah, I don't use as much target language online. So, and I would like to use more target language online, especially in culture discussions, because, so Herman, I know you said it means a lot more to the students when they're using their native language, but I actually disagree with that. I think that they can actually learn a little more about the culture if they're talking about it in the language of the culture. And I think, it's really difficult for a novice level student to be able to do that, of course. But, students who are like intermediate high levels can definitely do that, and they're totally capable of it. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm only teaching Japanese at a novice level here, but that's what I was originally saying. It definitely, how the language is written with a different script definitely influences how much target language is even being used in my classroom, at least.
Okay, wow, we got a lot of the. So Jenny says that she uses more target language as a coach than she did in the face-to-face classroom. But just to clarify, I think that's as a conversation coach. And so I have a follow-up question for her, which I'm sure she's working on, is do you think that's because of the role or, instead of the online versus face-to-face element? Ashley says the online environment removes the fear factor, though. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think there was a little bit of a delay, so hopefully you guys can hear me. But I do think that has to do with the role. I really try hard because it's a synchronous environment, and I've started to use the video camera too. And the students, they aren't always able to use the video camera because of the time that I teach. It's at their school, so they might not have a video camera there. But I feel like it's more personal even than, I don't know, when I taught it as a class, I guess it was a little more intellectual. But yeah, I definitely think it's the role in trying to focus on as much target language as possible.
Great, thank you, Jenny. And Ashley mentioned a great point, which is the online environment removing the fear factor, which is, one of the biggest responses that we get as world language teachers online is a lot of the students in the speaking assignments might be shy or introverted students. And that actually, I've had many students tell me that that's why they took online language, is because they're too shy or they don't feel comfortable taking it in a face-to-face classroom. And so but then they come out of their shell, and that effect, the filter goes way down, and they're producing so much language and communicating, I mean, just almost like night and day as compared to what they would do in a face-to-face classroom. So very interesting. Thank you. Move on. I'm going to talk, so I got to keep tabs on my time. Bridget, help me keep tabs on my time. Okay, so as part of the second part of building the relationships, of course, is to maintain those relationships. As humans, we know that successful relationships take a lot of work, right? So this is not any different than an online class. The relationships must be nurtured to be maintained in order to stay healthy. So the students, to do this in the online environment, it's important for the teacher to try to integrate team building activities, opportunities for the students to continuously foster and grow their relationships. And these don't necessarily have to be completely separate assignments, even though they could, but it's more of it could be an element of an assignment. For example, if you have students participate in a discussion forum to talk about what they like and they don't like to do in their spare time, then encouraging them to compare what they like with at least 1 to 2 of their classmates. So they're having to go in and read or listen to the responses of their peers and then respond. And so that helps them improve their relationships and then provide additional connections if they relate to one another. Then they might even communicate outside of that assignment, say, hey, I noticed that you wrote this on your assignment. That's so cool. Da, 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 da. So that happens a lot, and encouraging students to constantly make comparisons in that aspect to each other, but then, of course, as we know as world language teachers, to other cultures, and doing that in a positive and informational way. And I'm just catching up on the chat. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay. Yes. And you're exactly correct, Russ. Another thing that we have found I have especially found very successful is doing a student spotlight via course announcements. Of course, the term announcements might vary depending on what learning management system you're using, but the student spotlight is basically an area where you would highlight a student. You pick a student. It could be weekly. You could do 1 a week. You could do more. It depends on how many students you have and, of course, how long your session is, your semester, or if it's a year, etc. But in the student spotlight, you might include a photo of the student or a photo of something relevant to the student. You're going to highlight maybe some background information about the student, where he or she wants to go to college, their interests, hobbies, things that he or she might have. And that's very helpful. And then they get to learn even more about each other. And, kids always love seeing their name in lights, and they feel, recognized in a special and unique way for being them. And that, of course, helps in their interaction as well. Okay, so just to give you an idea, I'm going to put a link to what I use to gather the information for my students. I did a beginning of course student survey, and this provides me with the information to do the student spotlight, but it also provides me with information that I use for data purposes and things like that in my courses. So more than click on that link and explore that. In addition to setting aside a special time to recognize students via the spotlight, it's important to recognize and celebrate the student work in the course, whether you're highlighting a project that they did or maybe an idea or perspective that they brought about in a discussion forum or assignment, and highlighting that, and then encouraging other students to connect with to compare their perspectives and ideas and potentially connect with those students, ask follow-up questions to those that they pose that may be unique or different for them. So to just keep that conversation going. And of course, it's important as the teacher to constantly model appropriate discourse and interaction by sharing your own examples. And you want to provide students the opportunity to lead. Of course, this might look different depending on the level of the course, the type of course, all of that. But the general concept is the same, as having some opportunity for students to lead in projects or to teach or to facilitate conversations with their classmates and even with you. And doing that in a group setting with students helps also highlight their strengths and make them a stronger, tight-knit community as well. And lastly, encouraging students to connect via social media is a wonderful way to extend their learning and their relationships outside of the classroom. Disclaimer, of course, is just to consider the age level and appropriateness of that. At NCVPS, most of our students are 9-12, but I've taught students as young as 5th grade. We have a lot of and sometimes we have just special sections for elementary students, and we have some, have a good bit of middle students. But fifth grade is the youngest that I've done an online class, and so obviously there's a huge variation from my fifth grade student to my senior, and so you just have to consider those unfortunate, potential things that might occur. There are very good things that can happen via social media, as we know, and there are also, not so good things. And so being aware of that as a teacher, and just to be where they are, and I'm not necessarily saying monitor everything that they do, but, just be in the conversation, be aware if you are on social media, but don't, of course, the second disclaimer would be, if you use something personal, of course, you don't use that with students. But if you have a professional account, like for example, and I see Bridget says she uses Twitter, and that's what I use professionally. I use Twitter, so I quote, well, and Twitter is called follow, right? So I follow students, they follow me on Twitter, and everything I do on Twitter is regarding my work in some way. It's nothing personal, family, anything like that. Whereas my Facebook, I reserved for personal use, and so I don't use that with students. So, and of course, educating students on that is a part of what we do as online teachers, and to be able to, form these relationships and to make sure that they're healthy, and educating them on what that is too is a large part of what we do. Of course, that's not world language related. All right, and then moving right along, if it'll go. Okay, to interactive course design. So first step we talked about setting up and establishing relationships. And now, of course, this kind of is a kind of thing, but the course itself should have some sort of interactivity built into it. So that it needs to have, as much interaction as you can into the course, and this will vary depending on what type of course and the level and all that. So building and maintaining relationships enables trust, fosters community, and prepares students to successfully work together and interact with each other within that actual coursework. Of course, lowering the affective filter by addressing the students' social and emotional needs allows them to move forward to more strategic academic goals, which is where this, the course design comes into play. In a high-quality course, several opportunities for interaction should be included. In a world language class, these opportunities would, of course, leverage the standards and, our language domains, and allowing the students the opportunity to connect, interact, and share in speaking, listening, writing, and reading assignments provides them with a well-rounded language experience and an opportunity to have successful interaction in all of those domains. And of course, this interaction can take place synchronously via webinars, live meetings, live classes, conversation coaching sessions, and asynchronously via discussion boards, forums, wikis, collaborative docs, commenting on presentations, and more. We're going to take a look at that in a little bit. But regardless, the activities themselves should require authentic opportunities for students to communicate and encourage shared goals. So as with, making sure that you focus on that authentic part, I think, is a huge piece of what we do, is making sure that the task is relevant and authentic when you're looking at the actual L2 assignments and exercises that do allow for the student interaction. As with any assignment activity, it's critical for you to plan ahead. Especially with group work, you want to ensure appropriate group size. You have to allow ample time and flexibility. You have to provide very clear guidelines, steps, and outcomes for working as a group. Allow for assessment of individual and group performance, and then give meaningful feedback on group participation when you are looking at group work. Many, if not all of those things, can be directly established via a group learning agreement, which is what we use at NCBPS, or at least in Spanish, for group work online. And this is where I pose my next question: is how can group work be done successfully in online class? Because a lot of times, and I don't know how many of you have taken online courses yourself, but that oftentimes, and if you talk with your students, that's one of the frustrations, is having to do group work online. So successful to me is that they are able to achieve the end goal product, and it's of high quality, but also that they are not frustrated in the process. So does anybody have additional tips or strategies or discussion around that of how group work can be done successfully in an online class? Yes, yes, we're going to talk about wikis. Yeah, we're going to talk about Collaborate. Any additional strategies specifically similar to like a group learning agreement? I don't know if you all use group learning agreements as well, or assigning roles. I think one of the biggest things with assigning roles, and of course that's in the critical planning process, you know, with our kids in our courses, the way they currently work is you might have students at different points. I mean, ideally they would be all at very similar points in the course, but that is not always the case. And so do you put the students together who are all ahead so that they're all, you know, on the same page literally, or do you try to mix your high learners with your low learners like you would usually do in a face-to-face classroom? So there are different implications for your grouping strategies in the online environment. So that's important to consider as well. Okay, I'm going to move on along. I think I'm getting over my time. I'm drawing near the end anyway, though. All right, and then the third part is the technology that surrounds and provides for, you know, the interaction with students. And so we're going to look at some of these, and of course this is going to be covered in the next presentation, so I'm going to do just a very you know, broad perspective of some of the things that I've used or we use in our courses. Of course, in pretty much any LMS, you have these three tools: discussion boards, forums, and wikis. And you know, they're just basic elements of student interaction usually in a course, and they allow for asynchronous communication and collaboration among students. And so, you know, sometimes they serve a specific purpose as a result of being asynchronous. Whereas Blackboard, Skype, Google Hangouts, or Google Chat, you know, kind of change the name, they allow students to connect with each other inside or potentially outside of the course. Of course, Blackboard IM is a proprietary product. It's paid subscription, and it allows for students to text chat, verbal chat, and what I like is it allows for screen share and actually for students to work on a shared whiteboard similar to Blackboard Collaborate. And of course, the students have access to each other in that class. They can see their classmates. The other two products, Skype and Google Hangouts, have a slightly less functionality, but they're free, which is a big selling point, of course. And they all, of course, allow for live interaction and encourage spontaneous communication, which is we're going to talk about in a little bit, and help foster community within the course. In CBPS, we use Blackboard IM, though, amongst our students. Blackboard Collaborate, which of course is what we are in now, and WebEx and GoToMeeting are all examples of web presentation software. They are all paid, however, and they of course allow for live spontaneous interaction verbally or via chat like we've been doing tonight. Shared whiteboard is a great feature, presentation area, screen share. Blackboard Collaborate has a polling feature and breakout group opportunities, which is really an awesome way to do discussions and student-student interaction. And then you have a timer that you can use. So if you break students out into breakout groups and then you set a timer and you give them a topic, and you can actually move between the groups to hear their discussions. And then, you know, so you're kind of monitoring at all times. It's not like they can be goofing around, but they're in small groups. And that's, I think, one of the greatest features of Collaborate that is highly underutilized. And of course, we use Blackboard Collaborate at NCDPS for our required live classes as well as our conversation coaching sessions. I think conversation coaching sessions can be in different ways, but of course, the teacher provides instruction, and they allow for actual guided practice, so students can work together on assignments as well as independent practice. And they are, of course, encouraged to work together in partners or groups and even lead discussions and explain concepts themselves within those required lab classes or sessions that we might have. Just as an additional resource, For those of you who are not NCVPS teachers and don't know about our required live classes, I'm just giving you a little video that we give to our students at the beginning of the semester that it kind of just gives a brief summary of what they are and what to expect. The conversation coaching sessions provide students the opportunity to really improve their interpersonal speaking proficiency. And sometimes those can be one-on-one, like just with the conversation coach who's a native speaker and the student, but they can also be done in small groups as well, so you would have that student-to-student interaction. Of course, one of the things that are the hardest things to account for in an online environment is the spontaneous interpersonal communication, as you would get in a face-to-face environment, because your students are not there together. It's very easy. We have tools for allowing, asynchronous verbal feedback and listen and respond, but having that spontaneous communication is really difficult or challenging. And so I came up with the idea, and we have not put it into action yet because it's relatively new, it came recently, of having students go into, and of course this is for NCVPS to clarify, critical languages have conversation coaches, but the modern languages do not, so Spanish, French, Latin, what am I missing? So several of us do not have conversation coaches, and so the teacher is the sole person responsible for everything. And of course, it's teacher's time is few and far between. So I had the idea of having students actually go into a Blackboard Collaborate room like where we are now, and whether it's just two students partnered up, or whether it's a small group of students, and maybe providing them a prompt, or they could select a prompt or various questions, and they actually record their session of them talking. So it would be spontaneous communication, and they would archive their session, and then the teacher could listen after the fact. So it's not like the teacher would have to be in at that time in everybody's session, because they would be archived. The teacher could go in and listen to what the students did. It requires a little more planning, but it's something that I think we're going to explore and potentially do soon. And then in regards to Google Docs, spreadsheets, and presentations, of course, they are wonderful for their ability to communicate and collaborate among students, and of course they are free. And so in addition to the collaboration that you can have with Google Docs and the sharing element, there's also the commenting feature. So you can truly collaborate to create a product, and then you can have other students go in and review and analyze and evaluate and make comments. So you have a really awesome tool that can provide for a high level of student-to-student interaction there. All right, and then I accidentally skipped the one that I had really quickly. I think it's this one. Oh, no, that's not it. This one, voice boards and VoiceThread. We use voice boards at NCVPS, but basically these two tools allow students to record their voice, listen to each other, and respond verbally or in writing. So this is what we have been using to do our kind of interpersonal speaking, but like I said, it's not spontaneous, but at least they can listen and respond, and it is like a conversation. It's just not the spontaneous piece. And so they listen and respond verbally, and that helps, of course, improve their speaking and listening. So that's what we currently use. So my question to you, because I'm done with my formal presentation. Yes, but it's not WIMBA. It's Blackboard bought it out, but it is still around. But Blackboard now owns it. But I don't think they call it Blackboard VoiceBoard. It's just called VoiceBoard, I think. So my two follow-up questions for my session that we have not already discussed, I'll put those in the chat box. The first one is, how does technology improve student-to-student interaction? And then what are some additional ways that you all can or do improve student interaction and collaboration in your online class? Or if you're not an online teacher, what are maybe some ways that you would if you were teaching online? And I'm done. Bridget, I don't know if you want me to facilitate questions or if y'all need to go ahead and move to the next one.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Go ahead, Stephen.
We probably should move on to the next speaker, but I wanted to say one thing that helps facilitate interaction is if when you design a task, you make sure that it's a chained task. In other words, each student has to listen to the person who came before and answer or deal with some kind of question that that student left for them. And then each student is required to leave something in turn for the student who follows them to use. This holds especially in asynchronous interaction task design, but also in synchronous interaction. If each person has that kind of task, then it helps a lot.